What I bring to you here is literally, and I want to make this incredibly clear, at the beginning of a conversation. Nothing has been determined. These are different questions that have arisen as a result of the NCHEMS report, for example, that you saw in our last meeting. They were issues we were already talking about, and you all indicated your interest in speaking further on it. So I wanted to bring this discussion to you here at this initial stage. And assure the community, because these are big issues that touch on lots of people, that these conversations will engage all stakeholders in the community. It's just essentially a tee-up of the conversation to come and some initial thoughts about where we might be headed. So I start with, really the concept that a structure, administrative structure, has to be designed to support mission and vision. Right? And where there are disconnects, evaluating how do we get rid of that? From my perspective, the system is there to do things that we cannot achieve independently on our campuses, where we can coordinate that type of systemic engagement. And frankly, where we're in the way, we need to get out of the way to allow the campuses to do those functions. So it's all part of a question of, how does what we currently have impair or facilitate what are the mission and vision of this institution? And how do we create an administrative structure that outlasts individual personalities? I think we are looking at a history of back and forth in different places across how we've set up our administrative structure, which is to be expected for any long-standing institution. But part of it is that we create structures that respond to individual talents and strengths, rather than asking the question, how does the structure itself create the strengths and facilitate the engagement for whoever sits in those positions? So as we're looking at these questions, I want to assure you our focus is not, what do we want to do? What is the most fun part of the job? But really asking, how does the alignment with the vision and mission get carried out in an effective way that lasts my tenure and hopefully the tenure of anybody at the university? And you don't need to see this, but just to remind, it's a pretty complex place. 10 campuses, 5 education centers, and they all have independent and unique needs, but also a lot of commonalities that we're sometimes approaching in 10 different ways and never reaching the power of the scale that we could bring to bear and the resources that we have within the system. And I show you this structure just because you probably already know, but you probably don't see it in one place very often. And what I put the community college system in yellow just because it has a more extensive internal system structure, and I've got that here too, than the other campuses do. Every campus has its own internal campus structure, but the community colleges have an additional layer of the community college system within the system, all of which reports to me, but has a consolidated approach for the 7 campuses. And what I'll say is, as we begin this conversation, I think it's really important to state as clearly as possible how much I respect the autonomy of the community colleges and their role within the system. One of the first things that I heard from the chancellors of the community college system is that they wanted a more active role with the president, because right now we have an intervening layer between the chancellors and me, very effectively carried out by Della and her team at the community colleges, but a sense that absent that direct communication and engagement, that something is lost in translation potentially. And so I think this board knows, but worth mentioning for those who may not, we have already within the 9 months created a Chancellor's Council where I speak with the chancellors directly once a month. And I've created a leadership meeting monthly, that's 5 hours. That involves both the UH system officers and all chancellors across the system to begin to develop that team, to give more autonomy and voice to the community colleges. And most of this discussion that you'll hear is within that vein. I think there's always understandably a concern that something is lost anytime we move to a new structure. So I just think it's really important that I articulate. I'm starting from the position of how to strengthen each of these 10 while also strengthening the unifying voice where it matters for achieving outcomes for our students, faculty, and staff. So just to give you some initial thoughts here of why are we talking about integrating any portion of the system or thinking through this 10 campus collective strategy. And it really is because, as I said, programs are obvious, right? You just saw that in the last presentation. But what we didn't talk about is student mobility. Students are rarely these days a member of a single college within campus within our system. They're often on more than one. The vast majority of our students begin in associates with the intention of seeking a bachelor's degree, so they will naturally transfer. And yet what I've told you without specific data yet, but we'll get to that next time, is our transfer numbers are declining. University of Manoa at this point is serving more students from outside the system in a transfer capacity than within it. And so that tells me that we need to think through what we're doing here and work more collaboratively together to create a unified academic experience. And you've heard me say this, a common standard of care. Doesn't matter where you sit in our 10 campuses, every student is our student. There should be certain things that are guaranteed to you in terms of success and support for every single student. Another is just unified strategy. If we're pulling in 10 different directions that are segmented and not integrated, we're never going to be as effective because resources are limited. And sometimes strategy is just not clear, even when we think we're acting as a whole. So this will help us really focus and set clear priorities and also be better partners to the state as the very unique position we hold as the single unified higher education, public system of higher education in the state. It gives us an opportunity to ask questions about effectiveness and efficiency. Really important to say this. Efficiency is important. Using resources wisely is our charge as a public institution. But the focus that I have and that I'm asking people to really hone in on is effectiveness. How do we effectively deliver what's within our mission? And some of our services could be, we think, and we will begin an exploration, more effectively delivered in a common setting, right? So the one you've heard me talk about repeatedly is technology. If all the different campuses are using, who need a CRM, are using a different one, then as they transition back and forth between our campuses, there are new things that have to be learned, data that doesn't transfer, etc. It's the kind of thing we actually could simplify and increase effectiveness by coordinating together. And that's true for policies and all different kinds of things that fit within there. Something I'm going to be talking about to you in the months ahead is compliance, risk management. If everyone is doing their own thing in a world of federal compliance, increasing demands in the area of both federal and state compliance, we are at risk for not having a consistent approach that can be managed or at least monitored in a central way, in a way that's transparent. And finally, I think it's an exciting thing for our faculty and staff in terms of promotion opportunities and professional development. Right now, where you sit may limit how far you can go. And the only way that you can actually move forward is to transfer between our institutions. We see that a lot. And if there were a more integrated system, there may be ways to take really valuable employees who've capped out in different places and use their talents more broadly without forcing them outside of the system. Of course, we know there are challenges of an integrated system. There's no denying that, and these things are really important in thinking about and warrant caution as we proceed. And of course, right there at the top is the identity and strength of each campus. What we need to do is identify where strategic decision-making should take place, where it sits with the people with the most information and the closest connection, right? Some of those are indisputably on the campus, and there has to be that level of control at the campus level. Some of those will only be true at the system level in terms of the perspective that can be brought to bear. So we have to be really sensitive to that in working through these questions. Of course, there may be costs associated with restructuring. Some of those might be cost savings, but some will indisputably not be that. If we decide, for example, as we talk about the division between Manoa and the system, I can tell you There are areas now that we cover, but candidly don't cover well because we are combining functions that are enormous and that need more personnel. So as we move or consider the separation of those functions, there will be the need to fill in some of those gaps for sure. And of course, people don't like change. And any change that touches, on this kind of conversation is going to engender some resistance, especially at the beginning, and anxiety as we move forward. So just want to give you a couple really quick examples of how the current structure is not always serving the best intentions despite everybody's efforts, and where coordinated strategies really can make a difference. So one place I think it's most obvious is enrollment. And, it's nice when the system goes up as a whole, but we've never really focused on that. We've asked each individual campus to focus on their enrollment and also held people accountable for how well they did with that. And what that means is that it's in my best interest for jointly located places. And I'll just use UH West Oahu and Leeward as an example, and Manoa, because the three of them have some type of, and Kapiolani. All of them are competing in some respects for the same students. How we offer scholarships, how we offer programs directly affect each other, not just the individual campus at issue. And thinking through a more holistic strategy of enrollment, for example, could lead to a much greater strategy across the system, like the one that we just articulated for you, which is really about coordination rather than isolated pathways. Another one is uneven resource allocation. I can tell you that I've asked my team to start looking at what is the allocation that we have per student across the individual campuses that come out of legislative allocations. And they are not even. In some cases, they're not even close to even across the campuses. And so those are things we need to think about as we try to say, your student is my student, is our student, and creating an equivalent opportunity for each one of them. And that goes both ways. That relates to community college bachelors, for example. Oh, well, in the next one, mission creep, right? Bachelor's degrees at community colleges and technical and education programs at 4 years, at least at a flagship. That's an R1 research institution. Question is not whether they can do it, but can they do it most effectively in that place for the benefit of everybody? And then technology mismatches we've talked about. And I'll just say stagnation is a real potential challenge from the lack of integrated strategy across our campuses. I know that there have been, for example, a lot of well-meaning conversations over the last 5 years in general education, and yet we have not been able to come to a conclusion. It shouldn't take 5 years. It should be something we're looking at consistently, continuously, for the benefit of our students, as opposed to making it individual campus fights that are having to take place, right? And I think you see the effect of that in transfer. You see that in the effect of the growing external transfer that I showed you a few minutes ago. And so being able to create a more integrated administrative structures helps us have those conversations without intruding into areas that have traditionally been held in one area or another. So just a few concrete examples for this high-level conversation that we're having. So, I included this slide, and I understand it has already created some consternation. And so what I want to say is these were the things that were even identified in NCHEMS that we talked about in the last meeting. So, none of this, is preordained, although one of these things was announced today. So I will comment on that as we go. But these are possibility and ways of thinking about what's happening that could conceivably be a move forward. So, at the top here is the community college system within the system. And I say again, in terms of the overall structure of the community college system, it reports to me. And so thinking through how to integrate that more completely within the system doesn't lose that. It doesn't even mean that we change the focus of people who are sitting in those positions, but we integrate it in terms of the administrative structure. Could be done in any number of ways. But I will candidly tell you what, from my perspective as the president, what I see are the community colleges, Hilo, West Oahu, and Manoa as four pieces of the system that are not coordinating, collaborating consistently with each other in a way that allows for unification. So thinking through how to integrate those four to create the support that each one of them deserves is really the conversation as I see it. We talked about increased shared services. That conversation is taking place. Today, I know you are aware that we actually made a stride on the third one, and it's something that I've spoken individually with all of you about, and that's thinking through how we can create dual mission comprehensive institutions. Today, there's an opportunity with Chancellor Benham's stepping down from West Oahu, and I am hoping next meeting of the Board of Regents that you will approve Chancellor Peñalosa, who is at Leeward Community College, simultaneously sitting over both of those institutions in an interim capacity at West Oahu, starting in January, and of course, keeping his current position to explore with the campus. And I say explore, again, because it's not predetermined, whether we can reach another place for West and Central Oahu that we haven't been able to achieve with independent institutions. Just today, there were some additional notices that 3-year degrees, including in Hawaii, are moving forward at different institutions. We need to be asking the question, how do we serve as a hub of innovation for academic programs and teaching? And I think both of those institutions are leaders in that space and perhaps can become even more effective, considering how they may align together. And then, of course, the one we've talked the most about, I know you've been talking about as it relates to my position, is decoupling that Manoa and system president role. It will not surprise you, I said this last time, that some of the other conversations that we're having sort of depend in terms of how people feel about it, with whether we resolve that one in terms of a split in positions. So, I'm happy to have that conversation, but that's one that's been ongoing and is a natural component of the conversation. So I just add this, and this is my commitment to the board, but equally importantly, my commitment to our stakeholders, students, faculty, and staff, as well as our community and people who care about this. These are going to be conversations. This is going to be an engaged dialogue where people have the opportunity to identify, this is working, this isn't, we're worried about that. This looks like a good idea on paper, but those of us sitting in these positions have these concerns. All of those things will be part of the conversation. We are at the beginning of the dialogue, not at any point where decisions have been made. And so be assured that these will be things that we discuss openly, transparently, and with clarity, so that it's not going to be any sleight of hand that's happening here. This is going to be in full view of our community and with community's engagement. So I'll stop there and take any questions that you have, but obviously there's a lot there and there'll be a lot of additional follow-up, but I did think, given that NCHEMS was in our last meeting, that this would be a way to help you all conceive of how we are going forward with some of the questions that were teed up in that report.